By far, Godzilla's most iconic power, and an already iconic character, the atomic ray has solidified the idea of kaiju absolutely requiring an energy breath weapon to truly stand out among their peers. Sure, dragons have been doing fire for literal centuries in mythology, but kaiju have managed to turn that into something else in their own right with a little bit of nuclear flair. That actually does have some basis in reality. And we're going to be going over all of them, from the original before it became the atomic ray as we know it, every power-up, augmented, and juiced-up version the Big G has had before losing it like Samus in between a Metroid game, and how on different versions of Godzilla it has actually operated entirely differently from one another despite being called the exact same thing. Regardless of whether it's being powered by eldritch cosmic forces stolen from foes, to just being literal flames, or even a molecular laser formed from the confluence of multiple timelines being blasted towards his enemies, Godzilla's attack is officially known as the radioactive heat ray, though we do tend to know it best as the atomic breath, or the atomic ray. No matter how much it may change, it will always stay some good old-fashioned nuclear force projection capable of destroying humans and our military machines with ease, smiting aliens, and spelling generalized doom for all who stand in the King of the Monsters' way. Originally, it was known by the name of the Incandescent Light, which really wasn't even meant to be this much of an offensive tool in his toolkit. Back in Gojira, and later Godzilla Raids Again, it was really nothing more than a superheated jet of radioactive vapor, being almost a mist that looks, well, like how you are when you're breathing out in a cold winter day. I'd be lying if I said I didn't do this a whole lot when I was younger pretending to be Godzilla. Despite its much lower power in comparison to the later atomic ray, it's still potent enough to cause fires to break out from the sheer heat of it and melt military vehicles and power line towers. It's even how Godzilla scored his first kaiju takedown. Following a fatal bite delivered to Anguirus' throat, the incandescent light was used to set his foe's body aflame, delivering a swift and crispy end to the armored titan. Wrong titan. Good series though. If you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe for more, comment below your thoughts on the atomic ray, which one's your favorite version, and check out the rest of the kaiju goodness we do around here. We just posted our Godzilla -1 review, and I got a couple more videos on -1 and other various Godzilla-related things, and even some Transformers stuff in the future. Now we're getting to the fun stuff. Despite the rather popular misconception, Godzilla's atomic ray is not actual fire like a dragon. However, there have been a minimum of 3 different variations of Godzilla's atomic ray where it actually was in some way actually fire, being of either the conventional flamethrower-esque variety, or one with a little added atomic touch. The one where it was literally fire like a dragon was the Hanna-Barbera cartoon Godzilla. No nuclear nonsense, no nothing but just good old-fashioned flames. Also, fun fact, this Godzilla had eye laser beams. Dr. Evil would probably like it. Another cartoon Godzilla, Zilla Jr. from Godzilla the series, possessed a green-colored atomic fire breath, whereas his parent, the original Zilla, merely possessed a flammable power breath that ignited when on contact with open flames. In some ways, it is not that different from the original Incandescent Light, though whether or not this power breath is nuclear in nature, we don't really know. Once revived by the Leviathan aliens as Cyber Godzilla, it now possesses a classically colored blue version of his atomic flame breath. That is what this one is known as it is not quite the same kind of ray of doom earlier and other Godzillas have, instead being, again, nuclear fire. However, I do have a video going over in the future some of my theories about why they are so different from one another, and that the aliens may have had a hand in doing so. Mostly since I really love talking about Godzilla series, and always want an excuse to go and crack that thing open and watch it again. Rounding out our final fire-themed versions of Godzilla's atomic ray, we have Shin Godzilla's, and this is probably one of the most absolutely amazingly stupid names for anything ever, and I absolutely love it. The Super Thermal Radiation Particle Belt Flame. Yeah, I freaking love this. Something that actually uses the classic Godzilla atomic ray sound effect when it is in use. It will never cease to amaze me how kaiju powers all sound like freaking fighting game epic super combo attacks with how absolutely ridiculous they are. freaking love it. We gotta have more stuff like this in movies. This is also significantly lower in power than Shin Godzilla's atomic ray, something that we will be getting into significantly later, as it is markedly different from the classic and even the Heisei and later versions of Godzilla's atomic ray. Also shortened into being known as the thermal flame, it starts by Godzilla just belching out thick clouds of black smoke and flames. In its own right, it actually is quite powerful, capable of leveling and incinerating many blocks of Tokyo with absolute ease and leaving them in a radiated wasteland. It also consumes far less of Shin Godzilla's nuclear power supply than his atomic ray does, since when he loses power and his power goes down, the atomic ray will revert back to the thermal flame briefly before flaming out completely. While not strictly an array of flames itself, both Meyer Goji and Gira Goji, or rather Godzilla 2000 and Godzilla vs. Megaguirus' incarnations of the character, do not possess a classic blue-styled version of the game-ending beam. Rather, their version is an orange-colored ray that superficially resembles flames, and it does have incendiary properties due to the heat that it gives off. The classic blue beam does also start fires, but to a much lesser degree than this version does. So while it is not strictly nuclear doomfire in its own right, it is still a concussively forceful atomic blast with pinpoint accuracy. It just carries this sort of after side effect capable of setting nuclear doomfire flames in cities. This is also the same exact beam that Godzilla used to 1v1 a literal black hole. Now for the bulk of the video, this is the classic neon blue beam of destruction. One could almost call it a burst stream of destruction. That iconic blue glow responsible for more leveled city blocks, molten military hardware, and game-ended kaiju than any other. Introduced originally in Godzilla vs. King Kong back in 1992, the incandescent light had been replaced with a much flashier and more powerful radiation heat ray, and has served as Godzilla's primary go-to offense for most kaiju buildings and humans in the 62 years since it's been introduced. Based on Cherenkov radiation, something that is even referenced back in the movie itself, as while Godzilla was frozen, the iceberg does give off this neon blue colored light. Cherenkov radiation itself being this blue glow that real nuclear reactors do give off when submerged underwater. This is due to the speed at which particles are ejected from the nuclear fission. Didn't think you'd be getting a bit of a crash course in reduced nuclear physics, would you? Well, yeah, neither did I. Basically, electrons shoot out faster in water than the speed of light is capable of moving in water. So it creates these little, basically light sonic boom things, and again, it happens to be the exact same wavelength of blue light. If I had a nickel for everything in nuclear physics that the Godzilla franchise taught me, I'd have 2 nickels. It's not a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. During the Showa era, after it was first introduced, it tended to be a much less focused and more of a curving ray that fans out the further it travels. Despite the fearsome reputation this attack would gain in many later years, several kaiju of this era would actually shrug it off with absolutely no ill effect. King Kong, Rodan, though Rodan was also similarly unaffected by King Ghidorah's gravity beams, King Ghidorah himself, Hedorah, and Gigan all showed either outright immunity or some resistance to the attack itself. However, other monsters were shown to be quite vulnerable to it, as the original Imago Mothra met her end at this infamous ray, being the first victim of it. And many, many more kaiju would soon follow. It still retains this almost misty flame-looking quality for a while that the incandescent light did, though it was much more consistently a uniform beam that likely was a byproduct of the CGI technology of the time, less than they were deliberately doing that. Like many of Godzilla's traits, the Heisei era is where the atomic ray would gain its most revolutionary and long-lived properties. Rather than the Showa era's fanning out curved ray, the new and improved Godzilla, aided by further better CGI technology, would have his atomic ray similarly be enhanced visually, turning into a focused laser beam-like attack, capable of generating small explosions on contact with whatever is unlucky enough to get hit. Its power was also much more consistent throughout all of the movies, dealing consistent heavy damage and even fatal injuries to opposing kaiju like Rodan. However, some foes did prove to be immune to the standard laser beam. Yes, I did say standard beam, because Heisei Godzilla, starting in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, demonstrated the first upgrade to the atomic ray since it evolved past the original incandescent light. This being the spiral heat ray. It is not known if Heisei Godzilla pre-modern nuclear enhancement was actually capable of activating this secondary power level, but what is known is that it is an optional increased power output of his attack. Think of it much like Samus charging up her power beam. This enhanced attack has a small purple lightning spiral curling around the length of the beam. It is powerful enough to decapitate the middle head of King Ghidorah, who otherwise is one of the few kaiju in the Heisei era who was unaffected by the standard beam. It could be that Godzilla never had to activate this before, as everything went down to the basic beam until facing Ghidorah. Even the Super X2's fire mirror, which was specifically designed to reflect Godzilla's atomic ray back at him, melted down from the basic beam after prolonged usage. However, it also could equally be likely that this is simply a side effect of modern nuclear force multiplication tactics being used to empower this Godzilla. Regardless, the Spiral Ray would become almost the base form for all further enhancements of Godzilla's atomic ray through the Heisei era, and would become the building foundation of various atomic ray enhancements going forward. However, this is strictly for all of the blue neon beam variations specifically. The most absurd variant of these Godzilla atomic breath enhancements and variations is Godzilla Singular Point's atomic ray, which I like to call the space-time beam because it's not actually nuclear at all. Remember, in Godzilla Singular Point, all of the kaiju are extra-dimensional entities trying to force their way into our universe, rather than simply mutants. This is a particle laser beam created from a closed timeline curve cycling back in on itself. Essentially, it is a laser beam formed from various timelines smashing into themselves. Unlike most Godzilla's atomic rays when firing, Ultima's spines actually glow starting at the neck going down to his tail. In most incarnations of Godzilla, it actually goes the other way, traveling from the tip of his tail all the way up his spine. There also are these large rings that form around his mouth when he's firing this ray, which don't really know what they do, but they look pretty cool. In GMK, Godzilla Mothra King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, a briefly lived power-up was gained when Godzilla absorbed King Ghidorah's gravity beams. This new beam, dubbed the Gravitational Atomic Ray, was created by conducting King Ghidorah's own attack through his dorsal spines, adding its power to his own, and obliterated the three-headed guardian monster in a single blast. Keeping in mind, prior, Ghidorah had actually taken multiple hits from the standard atomic ray in this movie, and showed no visible signs of damage. After this, Ghidorah was basically reduced to flying chunks of meat dust. As for its appearance, it sparkles with the golden lightning effect that King Ghidorah's gravity beams have, wrapping around the beam, as well as his dorsal spines give off the same color scheme. In Godzilla Final Wars, he has two different enhanced beam variations. The first is a power increase of his own version of the atomic spiral, this being the hyperspiral heat ray. With pinpoint accuracy, Final Goji was able to blast the asteroid Gorath from the atmosphere. While it didn't destroy the asteroid entirely, it did more than enough to allow Godzilla to survive ground zero of the impact, an impact that leveled Tokyo. It does lack the classic purple lightning spiral around the ray, however it seems to have almost a helical blue wrapping around this time, its range also being at the very least Earth orbit. Again, showing that Godzilla can activate the spiral heat ray at will, he just chooses not to. Later on in the movie, after absorbing the Kaiser energy from Shinchi Ozakai, Godzilla gained the Burning G Spark Heat Ray, a more powerful red version of the hyperspiral heat ray, which was able to push Kaiser Ghidorah into the upper atmosphere and causing him to violently detonate. This is probably one of the most powerful variations of Godzilla's atomic ray, given it was able to shove the massive Kaiser Ghidorah all the way out into space and then cause him to detonate. Netflix anime trilogy Godzilla Earth has another markedly different variation of the atomic ray. While it is still somewhat atomic in nature, it has significantly more electromagnetic properties than prior versions, and has absolutely no incendiary side effects. Still being the classic neon blue with absolute pinpoint accuracy, it is not actually fired from Godzilla's mouth, unlike all the other different versions. Rather, it is formed from the natural electromagnetic barrier force field he has at all times. This fires directly from in front of his face rather than, again, inside of his mouth. In order to actually fire this beam, he needs to redirect the energy encompassing the entire field. Essentially, he is sacrificing his own shield to create the most powerful sword in existence. Minus Goji has many of the classics running through his atomic ray, though there are two major differences in the way that it functions. The first is its much longer charge-up time than any other Godzilla, either before or since. Inhaling large amounts of air, his spikes start to glow blue, and starting from the tip of his tail, once a spike is fully charged, it pushes out. This goes all the way up along his back, until every single spike is charged with that atomic blue glow, and once everyone is charged, they slam back down into his body. This is actually a nod to one nuclear detonation method, implosion detonations, where all of the nuclear material is forced into a smaller volume and causes a detonation at critical mass. The second part of this is the atomic pyrocumulus cloud that it generates, that signature mushroom cloud associated with nuclear testing. Previous Godzilla beams have generated explosions, even going back as far as the Heisei area, and even GMK had a scene of this. However, it was nothing to this scale and intensity. As before was capable of damaging a few city blocks, this was capable of vaporizing the heavy cruiser Takeo, and yes, this is because it triggers a nuclear detonation at ground zero. This is what allowed it to completely level Ginza with a single blast, and vaporize the destroyers, which were deployed as decoys at the end of -1. It also has quite a long charge-up time between usages. At the same time, it is also shown to be somewhat preventable, or it could be that Godzilla is manually canceling the firing sequence himself. Whichever one it is, we don't actually know. I'm inclined to lean this was Godzilla manually shutting down the firing sequence himself, since he didn't fire the beam directly upwards at the ships when he was forced downwards. And once sent to the bottom of Sagami Bay, he didn't fire the atomic ray when he was in a more stationary position. The spine simply went back into his body and the glow dissipated. However, when he resurfaced, he did need to recharge, showing he is not capable of saving a charge for later usage. Again, much like Samus. A lot of Metroid references. Making a lot of Metroid references today. Haven't even played Dread in a month. I should get better playing that. Save for the Monsterverse, we are actually all done with the classic atomic blue beam, since Monsterverse Goji is getting his own section. Previously, we brought up Shin Godzilla's atomic ray with the thermal flame, but now it's time for us to go over the atomic ray itself, because he's got 3 different flavors, each of them progressively more doom-causing than the last. Shin first evolved his atomic ray after the massive ordnance penetrator bombs were dropped by US B-2 Spirits. It was actually evolved as a self-defense mechanism, the super thermal radiation particle belt flames, condensing into a purple ray that ironically uses the same exact sound effect as the Oxygen Destroyer ray, rather than the previous Godzilla atomic ray blast. Rather than the way that previous and subsequent atomic rays have been scaled in relation to Godzilla's mouth, where the atomic ray is the same size as Godzilla's mouth, this one is a much smaller beam that is projected from within his mouth, making it almost like a razor blade or a surgeon's scalpel compared to something like a claymore. This more narrow, focused ray is capable of slicing through buildings like, well, actually a lightsaber. One pass through and a building is completely cut in half with that same melted, glowing molten steel. He is also capable of firing beams from his dorsal spines, much like a nuclear-powered porcupine. These beams fire out in a fairly wide arc, and with his added internal phased radar array, he doesn't even need to see with his eyes to know where to target. All he's got to do is just rotate his back in order to hit different things. However, this heavily depletes Godzilla's atomic power supply. Just look at the number of beams he's expending here. And after firing this, he only got a short distance before needing to hibernate for 15 days to recharge his nuclear power reserve. Another limitation of this is that he can't fire his mouth ray at the same time he's firing the dorsal spine rays. And for this, he evolved the third variation, one beam fired from the tip of his tail. And unlike the previous one, he can fire his mouth ray and the tail ray at the exact same time. This was likely an evolved countermeasure because of the overly impractical and wasteful nature of the full blast dorsal spine barrage, allowing him to target in tandem, with increased firepower, but not so much it depletes him. Okay, that was a lot. Now let's get on to the major upgrades to the various atomic rays which turned the beam red. There have been a great many of them, and they're all rather different. And thank you once again for sticking with us as long as you have. Please don't forget to subscribe for more. Atomic Ray Blast, that subscribe button, if you will. These power-ups are generally gained from absorbing an external energy source, either siphoning them off of an enemy or a power granted to Godzilla by an ally. The first of this is the Hyper-Uranium Heat Ray, granted to Godzilla by Fire Rodan's sacrifice after both were critically injured and near fatally wounded in their respective battles against Super Mechagodzilla, with Godzilla's secondary brain being destroyed rendered him paralyzed, and Fire Rodan being fatally wounded by the plasma grenade. He chose to give up his remaining life force to Godzilla, healing his secondary brain so that he may protect the newly hatched little Godzilla. An added side effect of this was Godzilla inherited Fire Rodan's uranium heat beam, which combined with his own atomic ray to create this new hyper-uranium heat ray. This red beam is so hot it actually burns Godzilla's own mouth, as well as being so intense Godzilla is not able to sustain its usage for extended periods. Being 1 million degrees Celsius, it was so powerful it was able to overpower Super Mechagodzilla's Mega Buster Cannon and melt off Super Mechagodzilla's diamond coating, which was previously completely impervious to the standard atomic ray and Fire Rodan's uranium heat beam, which also allowed Super Mechagodzilla to harness the attack and fire back the plasma grenade. This new ray completely obliterated Super Mechagodzilla with only a few blasts. It also has the added effect of creating much more powerful explosions on contact than the previous Blu-ray did. It is not exactly known if Godzilla lost this power after Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, as he doesn't use it in later movies, and instead gained various other red-colored beams for upgrades. Very likely it did dissipate, but again, given it was very intense for Godzilla to use and did drain a lot of his power, no longer having Radon's sacrifice to sustain that power supply, he could have just simply chosen not to use it. Though other things would call this into question. Namely, Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, since in that movie, by destroying Space Godzilla's crystals, both the ones on his shoulders, his crystal fortress, and then later toppling Fukuoka Tower, he was able to steal much of Space Godzilla's eldritch cosmic energy. This granted a new spiral variant known as the Burn Spiral Heat Ray or Nuclear Fusion Heat Ray. While not as hot as the uranium heat ray, at only a 900,000 degrees Celsius temperature, it is far more powerful and generates similar explosions to the hyper-uranium heat beam. It also completely destroyed Space Godzilla's corpse and Mogera's wreckage, along with most of Fukuoka, with only 3 blasts. Again, without Space Godzilla's crystals to resupply the energy, it likely dissipated with time and was not able to be sustained going forward. This leads us into Burning Godzilla, something that when I was a lot younger, I actually thought it was specifically because of the energy that Godzilla absorbed in Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, he later mutated into Burning Godzilla. I wasn't actually right about that, but given in Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, his body does glow in the exact same patterns that Burning Godzilla later is shown with, and both have a red spiral atomic ray. I can't be the only one that thought was right. Burning Godzilla was created after the uranium ore deposits underneath Baz Island detonated in a massive nuclear explosion and were then absorbed by Godzilla and also Little Godzilla. Godzilla himself turned into Burning Godzilla, and the much younger Little Godzilla began to turn into Junior. As Burning Godzilla, his blue neon radiation heat beam has been replaced with the default Burning Heat Ray, which operates much like the previous Nuclear Fusion Heat Ray, causing massive explosions against whatever it hits. His spines also now glow red when charging up and are naturally red. This is likely one of Godzilla's most powerful beam variations. After his meltdown begins, he obtains what I believe to be by far the most powerful beam Godzilla has ever possessed in the entire franchise. The Infinite Heat Ray, or Burning Spiral Heat Ray. Its power is said to increase infinitely every time he uses it, now adding a red spiral and is capable of blasting apart anything it touches. However, this power does come with a cursed downside. Godzilla is only able to gain this power as he was beginning to die. His nuclear reactor was beginning to melt down uncontrollably, and the power was going out of control. While this is not an atomic ray in and of itself, I think it is something that I should mention. This is the burst of power that Burning Godzilla releases after he sees Junior passing and is beginning to grieve over it. It's never specified what exactly this is. Personally, I believe this to be a flare-up of Burning Godzilla losing control over his runaway nuclear power as he sees Junior passing away. Godzilla is melting down throughout the entire course of the movie, and very likely he briefly lost control when he saw his adopted son was no longer in this world, making this almost a nuclear-charged scream of anguish or an emergency venting of power after he briefly lost control. Well, that was a depression fest. Let's get back to some kaiju brawling to make the happies. Monster vs. Godzilla! Over the last decade, this one's gone through a lot of different looks, variations, and upgrades. Referred to as well in the series as the Heat Ray Breath, though I prefer the Radiation Heat Beam, or just simply Atomic Ray, originally back in 2014, it was almost this wispy blue flame, and seemed to be much weaker than past incarnations and future incarnations of the same beam. This dip in power is actually due to the Muto's natural EMP field, which somewhat dampens and disrupts Godzilla's atomic breath's power, in addition to their natural armoring being evolved to specifically resist the atomic breath after it was being dampened. This is why, to defeat the female Muto, Godzilla has to internally decapitate her, whereas before the atomic ray merely shoved her backwards. This atomic ray can also seemingly be absorbed by other Godzilla's dorsal spines, evident from the way that Kong's axe behaves and is able to block and contain the power of Godzilla's atomic ray, discharging on impact. Suggesting if Godzilla were to encounter another kaiju of similar capabilities, he would actually be able to receive power from them in this way. Side note, this beam is also powerful enough to go toe-to-toe with Superman in a beam fight, as his atomic ray is said to carry similar radiological properties to kryptonite. Yes, this is actually canon, and it is glorious. There's also a lot of misinformation about our Godzilla in the Monsterverse, a lot of things saying that he is the only one capable of using this attack, others that also say that no, this is a trait that all Godzillas of us have, and that's probably something we're going to be exploring a bit later on, as I do have my own personal thoughts on it. With Godzilla Kong the New Empire, he gained a new base heat ray variant after defeating Tiamat and absorbing her DNA, as well as the power from her den, which was actually originally one of Godzilla's old dens that she took over. It isn't stated too much how, or if any, power increase actually happened to this new pink version of the ray. However, to dissipate the ice storm Shimo created over Rio, Godzilla activated a spiral ray similar to his Heisei era and Final Wars counterpart. Considering that Shimo herself is a primordial kaiju, this ray must have been considerably stronger than any of Godzilla's previous rays, since the ice storm she had created is implied to be of the same strength, or at least similar in capacity, to the same one that she created, which caused the last Ice Age. Yeah, Godzilla pretty strongs. Though it is likely that storm-destroying variant will not be the default setting for his new atomic ray. It was very likely a one-time power-up, or at least it is too energy-intensive to be used over and over. Employed since the fight was finished and he didn't need to conserve power anymore, and it was going to set nature out of balance if a giant ice storm was going to be going, I don't know, around the equator. Showing once again, Godzilla might have the full power of the atomic ray backing him up to destroy other monsters, but it is his underlying intelligence that is actually his most dangerous attribute, which allows him to win most of the fights he encounters. After all, the atomic breath is meaningless if he doesn't know how to use it properly. That has been almost all of Godzilla's atomic rays throughout the years. It was a lot more than I expected, but this was pretty fun to do. Which of them is your favorite? Comment your thoughts below and subscribe for more kaiju goodness. Do you think future Godzilla movies will do more of these, or will they explain how the other members of Godzilla's species operate with their atomic rays? Or do you think that they'll bring back some older ones? Do you like Godzilla 2000's fire breath looking beam more, or the classic neon laser? Or maybe you're a fan of Shin's purple scalpel of doom? Personally, I do very much like the Heisei beam, but hey, that did become the standard for a reason. I've been Max Allo. Long live the Kaiju King.